Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event hosted by Australians Against COVID, as well as partner organisations, Advocacy for Inclusion, and we're being supported by the Socialist Equality Party here today. I want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people and that this land was stolen and never ceded. I also want to acknowledge the impact that the mismanagement of the pandemic has had on both disabled and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that this represents an act of violence against disabled people and against Aboriginal people. Before we begin, some housekeeping. This is a compulsory masked event with social distancing. We do have a few masks on hand in the event that people need them. I would ask, and people are doing it, that we form an arc around the tapestry and the displays here. There will be an opportunity for people who have bought flowers to pay their respects as we move forward this afternoon. We have signs. Feel free to take some and to make your voices heard. We are asking all attendees to respect the presence of the Australian Federal Police, who are around here somewhere, who have been made aware of the event. We've been asked not to photograph the police or the Parliament House security. We're hoping that today will be peaceful and respectful, as it is a memorial, but in the event that there is any kind of harassment, you are invited and asked to report that to the AFP. How today will run, I'll kick off with a few remarks and then introduce our speakers. Sam Connor, our colleagues from the Socialist Equality Party, and disability activist and President of People with Disability Australia, Nicole Lee. Nicole will read the death toll, and there will be an opportunity to lay flowers and to observe a minute's silence. This is not the only way to take part today, and we acknowledge all of those at home, all of those who are sick with long COVID, all of those who, because of the conditions that have been set by government, don't feel able to take part in today. If that's you, please feel free to take a picture of your front door and to tweet it to @AlboMP, making the point that we will not be shut in. Thank you. Over. Today we gather to do what our leaders have failed to do. We mourn the deaths of over 16,000 Australians. They are the unemployed. They are teachers. They are healthcare workers. They are educators. They are the homeless. They are queer people. They are frontline healthcare workers. They are the old, the frail, the sick, immune-compromised people, and disabled people. We grieve today. When there is a terror attack, the nation grieves. When an airline crashes, we grieve. When there is a bushfire, we grieve. When a cricketer dies from a stray ball, we grieve for days. When a monarch dies, we grieve for months. So what is different this time? What is different with COVID? Well, these are the deaths of people our leaders and business have decided are okay. The disabled people described as unsustainable burdens. The old thrown away into nursing homes and neglected. Low-paid workers and the unemployed regarded as expendable or replaceable. Our friends, workmates and leaders have been sacrificed to a preventable disease which has been allowed to spread for reasons of profit, opportunism, lies, conspiracies, and political cowardice. This is social murder. This is eugenics. In a moment, I will invite my friend and colleague, Sam Connor, to speak to the triangle quilt that we see here today, which has been assembled by disability advocates over the weekend. It is extraordinary to be part of a community that can produce such things as this in the time that they have. A triangle was a symbol used to mark out people that were judged unworthy and defective within the concentration camps. And in the 21st century, these symbols and these movements and these ideas have emerged again and must be fought. We know that the opposite is true. We know that people with disability are worthy. We know that low-income people are worthy. We know that the vulnerable deserve to be protected. Yet what we are seeing now is a slow euthanasia by plague of lives deemed more expendable than a cup of coffee in a city cafe. In the UK, nearly 60% of the people who died from COVID-19 had a disability. People with intellectual disability were 3 to 5 times more likely to die from COVID, and children with intellectual disability more likely to wind up in hospitals. In Canada, studies have shown that people with Down syndrome died at a rate 6 times higher than those without disability. And in South Korea, the odds of deaths from COVID infection are 6 times higher for people with disability. Disabled people are used to being the poster children for all kinds of ideas that deem our lives unworthy, including euthanasia. And some of us have stood out for years pointing out the dangers here, and sadly we've seen them arrive. Here in Australia, we know the toll is also high. There have been over 25,000 cases reported amongst NDIS participants. There have been 4,000 deaths of people in residential aged care. Residential aged care that is already defunded, that already operates with appalling standards and conditions. We've been prepared to watch as our older folk, our mothers and fathers, the veterans of world wars, have died in isolation and pain because of a preventable pandemic. Disabled people face a triple jeopardy in this pandemic. Firstly, we have a higher risk of death. Secondly, the pandemic is a return to segregation and to exclusion and seclusion of disabled people. Thirdly, it means that we can wind up with one disability on top of another because of the scourge of long COVID, which is the thing that tips us into nursing homes and tips us into acute care and tips us into hospitals. We know that hospitals are places where people with disability go and we never come out of. For those reasons, we are cautious about going out in public. We are treating the pandemic seriously, and to say otherwise of disabled people is to gaslight a whole section of the community. Day after day, governments have sought to minimise the impact of COVID and to gaslight our communities. They have written off our deaths as being from underlying conditions. State premiers held daily press conferences where they sneered and scoffed at the deaths of disabled people and others from underlying conditions, as if being disabled was a crime or a sin inflicted by God. But sadly, it gets worse when we come to long COVID. Long COVID represents a fundamental health challenge, threatening to become a mass disabling event greater than HIV, polio, and World War II. Based on infections so far, and these are figures from the Actuaries Institute, so they are figures from a conservative body that knows how to count these kinds of numbers, 400,000 people are likely to be left with disabilities due to long COVID, with over 100,000 people with a serious disability and 300,000 people with activity-limiting disabilities. The World Health Organization estimates that 20% of people infected with COVID will experience ongoing symptoms. We know these symptoms are serious. We know that COVID affects the brain, that it affects the cardiac system, we know it affects the neurological system, we know it affects the respiratory system. This was never the flu, and they always knew that. They knew that this was a disease that would cull through the vulnerable and create more sets of vulnerable people on the way through. So many more people are likely to become disabled as a result of this. Let all of us here today sadly assure you that if you become disabled, you cannot assume the support will be there. Don't assume anybody is coming to help you. It is no accident that the pandemic has seen attempts to dismantle the NDIS by stealth through independent assessments, reviews and changes. Governments have failed to raise the level of basic income support, either the job seeker so-called allowance or the disability support pension, which does not support people with disability. The organisation that I am also a part of, Advocacy for Inclusion, has recently done some work that shows that a person with disability is already behind $800 a fortnight after paying for gas and utilities and other costs in their lives. People are dying of pneumonia because they can't keep their house heated. On top of that, the last few months have seen attempts to ban and change the eligibility for the drugs that we need to keep sane, to keep well and keep whole. Panadine, Panadol and others. And some of people, including me, have been affected by this and left struggling. This is also an attempt to return disabled people to the attics, the basements, the institutions and the hidden isolation that was our experience of life for decades. In the work of Australians Against COVID, we have called for some key things to change this. We want a public commitment from all governments to end uncontrolled transmission of COVID in Australia. Well, we are not asking for returns to lockdowns, but we are asking for clean air, for contact tracing, for masks to be freely available, for distancing, vaccines and treatments for all. We need to stop requiring disabled and immune-compromised people to attend places like Centrelink in order to access services. People should be able to maintain social housing without going face-to-face. If they're going to force us to be isolated, to keep the cafes open, then they should mirror the services that we need to keep going in an online space. Essential services like doctors and dentists must be COVID-safe spaces. But of course, they're not doing that. Day after day, they are peeling back all of the restrictions and protections and the isolation rules, which mean that we have any confidence that we can go anywhere. I know people that have been literally trapped behind their front doors for years, and every time they remove a protection, we have to increase our level of protections. We need funded supports and community development for those who have been left abandoned in our homes for years. Long COVID should be recognised as a disability with access to DSP and the NDIS. Masks and HEPA filters should be available for everyone. As COVID worsens, we need a guarantee that disabled, sick and immune-compromised people will not be left lying in the corridors to die, as happened in Italy, as a form of involuntary euthanasia and eugenics. Lastly, we need, but not least, we need governments to step up and to do the things that they should have been doing to remember the dead, through a national memorial and a minute's silence to the people that have died from COVID. Sadly, we know that they did not do that. So instead, what we have done is that we've built this quilt of black triangles to symbolise the people who have died and to reflect on the history of the disability rights movement. I'd now like to invite my colleague and longtime friend and ally in the disability rights movement, Sam Connor, to speak about these things, about the work of activists and about the memorial. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. So it's been a really extraordinary almost 3 years for all of us. I think it's remarkable that there has been no acknowledgement that we've reached a benchmark of 16,000 people dead, that we have another 16,000 people who have been lost from excess mortality in the first 6 months of this year, that we have people who are increasingly becoming sick and disabled from COVID. When you think that each one of these inverted black triangles represents 4 people, and you look at the number of those people and think about those people as, you know, people who were standing here, they would fill this field that we're standing in now. I can't believe that those people have been erased because their lives were not less than our lives. They included children, they included elderly people, they included disabled people, they also included healthy people who had no conditions whatsoever. So we want to make sure that government recognise this, but also recognise the toll that long COVID is taking on the community right now. The numbers of people projected to be coming out of the pandemic with long COVID is 400,000, Craig.
Yep.
And there is no help available, as Craig has said, from the NDIS, from other systems, and this is a really big concern. The background of the images on the sheet in front of you of the inverted black triangle. Does anybody know about T4? So T4, there's a couple of people nodding. In Nazi Germany, the first people to die were disabled people, and they died in a program called Action T4. The symbol that was used to mark disabled people as well as other people branded asocial or work shy was the inverted black triangle. And so disability groups for decades have used this as a symbol of oppression. And that's why we've used this symbol today. We need to make sure that government listens and takes action. Nicole and I have flown here for this week to spend some time at Parliament to engage as many parliamentarians as we can, yet again. And this is all we talk about now. I want to thank every single person who is here today and every single person who spends their life endlessly talking about this issue, because it's not going to go away. This is an issue which we need to make our voices heard, and we need to make sure that we don't have more lives lost on a daily basis as we have done for the last few years. Thank you so much, Craig.
As Sam has made clear by this powerful demonstration that we've seen of the one in four Australians who have died in COVID, we are in a life and death struggle, in a struggle for our lives. In that struggle, disabled people should look to political allies prepared to resist the sacrifice of our lives with all their might. You'll notice, unless I've missed them, we don't have many politicians here today. We don't have people coming down from the House on the Hill to talk about this. We don't have people in our parliaments recognising this football field of people sacrificed as expendable to a pandemic. Despite all of the drama of last night's Victorian election, they're all the same on COVID. The biggest elephant in any room ever. I do acknowledge that we've got some colleagues, I think, from the Greens here today. They're fairly welcome, and that Jordan Steele-John has spoken out about the implications of this, but very few political parties have been prepared to stand alongside disabled people, calling out the pandemic as an instance of social murder. I've admired the principled stand of the International Committee of the Fourth Internationale and their Australian representatives in the Socialist Equality Party, who alone have spoken truth to power in the pandemic. Last week at the National Meeting of Health Workers, we were pleased to have a strong presence within that meeting and support from the party. And it's now my delight to introduce Cheryl Crisp from the Socialist Equality Party to talk about their positions. Thank you.
On behalf of the Socialist Equality Party, I would like to very warmly welcome everybody here and also thank Craig and Australians Against COVID for inviting us to speak at this vigil today. This is the first physical protest which has been held to highlight the consequences of the policies of governments, Labor and Liberal, state and federal, which have imposed upon the entire population, in line with all governments globally, the let it rip policy. But there have been no online meetings or protests or events either. That very fact requires probing. Outside our own political party, which internationally and here, we have held multiple global online webinars and dozens of discussions and meetings. Not one union, not one political party, including those who purport to be socialists, has warned, opposed, or attempted to inform ordinary people of the catastrophe which is the pandemic. And as the appalling number of 16,000 dead, which is now on a par with the numbers dying of heart disease, exposes, this is not a live with COVID policy, but a die with COVID policy. And through the impact of the disease on virtually every organ in the body, the process and the development of long COVID is now a feature which is here for us. Mankind is yet to really know the full impact of this murderous, homicidal policy. It is necessary, I feel, to understand why governments of every persuasion have adopted this policy. It's not a mistake. It's not because they don't have the reports. It's not because they don't know the impact of this policy. These are conscious, premeditated decisions in the interests of finance, production, profits, and the wealth of the tiny elite. In fact, we are meeting at the scene of the crime, Parliament House. Behind those walls, the National Cabinet, the extra-parliamentary, undemocratic and unelected body made up of predominantly state Labor premiers, is where all the decisions were made. In fact, in March of 2020, the first thing to be dispensed with was Parliament itself. Then followed the appropriation by Morrison of the 5, and now it turns out possibly 6 portfolios, which the 6th wasn't proceeded with. He was concentrating dictatorial powers in his hands, fearing, as he said, the prospect of civil disruption, extensive fatalities, and economic collapse. And where there is a crime, there are criminals. At this point, I must counsel caution. Even in the event that the National Cabinet granted your request to speak to them, in which you would undeniably, eloquently outline the horror of the disabled in the face of COVID, it would fall on deaf ears. The appeals for these individuals who populate the corridors of the National Cabinet and the National Parliament to do the right thing is a waste of your breath. They don't care. This is not an Australian phenomenon, but the response of capitalism. We only have to recall the July 2022 open letter by 18 eminent doctors and scientists who appealed to governments, health ministers, state and federal chief medical officers to revoke the deregistration measures against Dr. David Berger. His crime? For warning ordinary people of the dangers of COVID and of the policies which the governments have implemented. Not only did no government act on this letter, it wasn't even replied to. The COVID restriction measures implemented here in 2020 and 2021 were not the preferred option by the government, but imposed upon them by the demands of epidemiologists, health, education workers and others. In fact, any remaining measures that have been in place are now being lifted as we speak. In South Australia, the Labor government there has announced the removal of all PCR testing. Come January the 8th, the only basis on which one can access a free test is by a GP referral, many of whom now don't bulk bill. Otherwise, it will have to be paid for. And undoubtedly, this will be taken up by all the states. The reason figures aren't kept any longer is because they don't want to know, and they particularly don't want the population to know what the extent of the infection and death rate is.
Yeah, here.
The 22 million people globally who have died from a predicted, predictable, and preventable disease, and they are predominantly the elderly, the sick, the disabled, and poor working people, is not an accident. The reduction in welfare payments, which has been a goal of every government, including this one, is certainly high in their calculations. If it happens through a pandemic, then so be it. As is stated by more than one bourgeois governmental figure, why let a good crisis go to waste? This is the real face of capitalism, a system which condemns its poor, its most vulnerable, and its youth to infection, illness, long-term disabling events, and possible death, is a system that will not think twice about launching war. Just as war is the inevitable outcome of a system in its death agony, it cannot be prevented by appealing to the forces who are preparing to launch it, including the residents of the building behind us. The Labor government, like its Liberal predecessor, are spearheading the preparations for war against China. It knowingly places the Australian population in the front lines of what would inevitably become a nuclear war. While these governments prepare for war abroad, they carry out war against the working class and the poor at home. With rising inflation, interest rates, the cost of living, plummeting wages of workers don't go anywhere near to be able to provide what is necessary for the health and well-being of their family. We live in a system where none of the basic requirements of life are guaranteed for the world's population. It is a system which has no right to exist. There is only one force that can prevent the descent into barbarism. It is the working class, the class which produces all wealth, the class that can ensure capitalism, whose continued existence threatens life as we know it, is dispensed with and replaced with a socialist system. A system which is based on the needs of society as a whole, not the profit levels for a tiny few. A system based on equality and democracy. It is for that reason that we argue for the building of rank-and-file committees in workplaces, whether hospitals, schools, factories or offices, but also in communities which are increasingly faced with impossible conditions. Your friends and allies are not in the corridors of this building or in the union offices populated by highly paid bureaucrats who act as the policemen of the working class on behalf of governments and business. Your friends are workers, and that is who we fight to mobilise in committees independent of parties which defend capitalism, of capitalism, or of the unions who support them. Our party will assist in this endeavour, and we will also pledge to assist the disabled, the poor, and the working class as a whole in their struggles against what is an impossible situation which now confronts mankind. Thank you.
Thanks to Cheryl and our colleagues at the Socialist Equality Party for supporting today's event and for making some powerful points, I think, about some of the driving forces that we have been seeing in this situation, particularly the motive and the role of profit and greed in the mismanagement of this pandemic. The other thing that has happened in the pandemic, and the reason for coming here today, is that it's been very difficult over the past couple of years to hold any kind of face-to-face protest or action against those forces that are causing the let-it-rip policies that have killed so many people. They have relied on the fact that disabled people are stuck in our homes. They have relied on the lack of political leadership. They have relied on the fact that in this city, some of the loudest and most dissonant voices are the voices of the conspiracy theorists, of the fascists, of the liars that we can hear in the distance today. So part of what we are doing today is to come out and reclaim the parliamentary square as ours, and to do so loudly, not as useless eaters and disabled people that deserve to be drowned out and hidden away, but as people that have got a voice to power and that support lives before profit and end COVID now. And it's time we made our voice heard. Lives before profit. End COVID now. 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 Hopefully they heard that over there. We don't know. We might be on another live stream, and we'll get to see that a bit later on. One of the other realities that Cheryl just made clear, and Sam has made clear as well, is that you're going to need disability activists in what is to come. You're going to need disabled people's organisations. You're going to need helpers and people that are ready to stand up for our rights. And one of the people that I have journeyed with over a couple of years in our campaign for the Royal Commission to stop them from tearing apart the NDIS and for action on violence and abuse has been Nicole Lee. Nicole Lee is a disability activist and is also the recently elected president of People with Disability Australia, the national peak body. Congratulations, Nicole. Along with Sam and others, forms a strong line of leadership in our sector. I'd like to also invite Nicole to speak as a strong voice against COVID and to read the confirmed deaths by state so that we acknowledge the national nature of this tragedy. After Nicole speaks, Nicole will lead you through a minute's silence and also the end of today's proceeding and the ability of people to place flowers beside the memorial if you wish to. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming today. I'll keep it really brief because everybody's said some really important stuff and I don't want to replicate that. What I do want to acknowledge is the collective sadness and fear, frustration and grief that we've all felt for the last few years. You know, we've been put through extended lockdowns in some of the states, in particular Melbourne, the longest lockdown in the world, which gave us hope that our governments would keep us safe, only to have them turn around and take every single safety measure away from us, to lock us back into our homes while everybody else is able to go out and shop and visit their families and visit their parents. That is just, it's not good enough. We thought we were being protected, but again, we were given that false sense of security and we were lied to. We are scared and we're afraid. I'm afraid for my grandchildren and I'm afraid for my children, as everybody is. I am sad for the people that we've lost, 16,000 deaths. Some of those people we know, some of those our leaders in our community. Some of those were started the grassroots of our community, and we've lost them, and we didn't need to. They are deaths that didn't need to happen, and they happened because the government didn't take action on COVID. They didn't put in safety measures. They took them away. We're not here to hold the government of the day. We're here to hold the government of the day to account. That's why we're activists. We're not here to tell them that they're great. We're here to tell them what they're doing wrong and what it is they need to do better to protect us. So I'm just going to go through the national toll. At a memorial, it's customary to read out the names of people who have died, or even the number of people. But this is denied us. The numbers are so great that it is uncountable. However, as People with Disability Australia, as the President, but I'm here today as just a community member and not as President, alongside everybody else, so that we're all equal. I wanted to acknowledge the deaths that have occurred in every state and territory that we mourn today. Most of these have occurred this year. These should be marked in every parliament in every state. And as of Friday, the official casualties of COVID were as follows. New South Wales, 5,540 people have died. That's 5,540 people in New South Wales that will be missing someone at their Christmas table this year. Victoria, 5,593 people have died. That's over 5,000 families in Victoria grieving this Christmas. Queensland, 2,317 people have died. It's just insurmountable. Western Australia, 750 people have died. South Australia, 1,067 people have died. Tasmania, 201 people have died. Here in the ACT, 129 people have died. And in the Northern Territory, 79 people have died. That's a lot of grief. Sorry. I would like to invite you to join me in a minute's silence. But first off, I'd like to invite you to lay anyone that's bought flowers at the side of the quilt. So a minute's silence for the 16,076 Australians and the countless others who have died or remain sick, isolated and damaged. Thank you everyone for that. I just want to say one last thing in response to the cookers over there, that vaccines do make a difference. They do save lives. My father had polio when he was 5 years old and he was vaccinated. And because of that vaccine, he didn't end up with lifelong disability. Vaccines make a difference. So that concludes the vigil. We'd like to thank you all for being here and attending this event. We know that a face-to-face event is challenging for you as it is for us. I would like to thank Craig Wallace and Sam for their work and their friendship and their companionship, comrades in this, and of course their leadership. Please stay in touch with Australians Against COVID weekly. And to everybody online, please keep tweeting photos. What was it?
Vigil against COVID.
Vigil against COVID with the hashtag. Please keep tweeting those photos. Every single photo, every single tweet matters. They're being seen. Thank you very much.